how do you think we're, in the middle of negotiations with Russia on Ukraine? How do you think allies of the United Kingdom are looking at Downing Street and the scandal that is engulfing the country right now?
Well, as you know, Francine, I was really on to talk about adult vaccination globally. But look, this will be whatever it is. And frankly, in the next few days, there will be a report published, and then it's really for the Conservative Party to make up its mind as to what it wants to do. I mean, as I said in a speech last week, in my view, the most important thing, whatever happens with this particular scandal that obviously has rightly deeply concerned people and has dominated the news, the real question for Britain is, do we have a plan for the future? Because we've got Brexit, which is a change that's now happened. It doesn't matter whether you opposed it or liked it, but it's a change of consequence. We don't have a plan to deal with it. We've got a climate ambition that is enormous. We're going to have to, for example, double electricity supply in the next 10 to 15 years. And then we've got a technology revolution at the same time. So my anxiety has always been having a plan for the future of the country. And I'll leave other people to comment on what's happening in the UK politics cauldron.
Yeah, and I understand that, Mr. Blair, and we'll get to this report in a short while because it's extremely important. But overall, what should the Prime Minister do now? I mean, if he's broken the law, is it as simple as just people need to force him to resign in the party?
Yeah, well, let's see what happens, because I don't know. And as I say, I don't really want to turn into a commentator on what's happening in British politics. But if you take a step back and look at the big issues facing the country, frankly, that's what I'm most concerned with.
Mr. Blair, as we said, as Francine has said, we will certainly get onto that report and the importance of it that you've laid out with the institution there. But just on the geopolitics at the moment and Russia and Ukraine, where is the space for cooperation, do you think, between a West that is partly divided and the leader of Russia, Mr. Putin, who you met and worked with closely at times, who seems to have increasingly Tsarist-like ambitions for that country?
Yeah, well, there I think it's absolutely clear that you've got to have a strong, united front. Russia's got to understand that if it does invade Ukraine, it's going to face a huge set of consequences. And even though there are divisions in Europe, perfectly naturally, I think there's basic unity around that. And, if Russia does do this, because the whole case of Russia, which is that, Ukraine's about to join NATO, which it obviously isn't, that the West is trying to encircle Russia, these things are so patently wrong and false that I think we've got to understand that the ambition of President Putin is essentially to say there's a Russian sphere of influence. It doesn't matter whether these countries want to be within that sphere or outside of it. That's not their choice. He's going to force it upon them. And you can't allow that to happen on the doorstep of Europe. So I think there's short-term issues around how you make sure that if Russia does invade Ukraine, it pays a very, very heavy price for that. And then I think there are longer-term questions, which are questions really to do with, for example, how you ensure that Europe is not dependent on Russian gas supplies. And, I've said for many, many years, this is a big, big problem if we end up in a situation where Europe feels constrained to taking action because it worries about gas supplies for its people.
And that certainly seems to be a calculus of Olaf Scholz, the leader, of course, of Germany. Germany not providing military hardware to Ukraine, but the UK government is. We had to circumnavigate German airspace to do that. How far do you think the UK should go in assisting, military assistance to Ukraine? How far should we push it?
Well, I think the government's doing the right thing. It's made a strong statement not just in terms of words, but in actions, in what it's done. And, I think we will be, in this instance, very strongly alongside the US in saying there's got to be a united front. And if we end up in a situation where there are actually Russian forces that try and take more of the territory of Ukraine, they're going to be met with strong, not just sanctions, but deep economic and political consequences.
Mr. Blair, let's talk a little bit about the report that came out, and you're trying to talk about this global vaccination system. How can it be successful when we've seen so much vaccination nationalism in the last 2 years?
Yeah, well, that's exactly why it's so important to make sure we do it better next time. So essentially what we do in this report, which is the product of the work of a lot of different experts, is to say we're going to have a challenge with possibly future pandemics, and then we've also got a huge opportunity, because one of the unlooked for advantages during the whole ghastly process of COVID is there's been vast advances in medical science. So what we've got to do is create a structure where globally we act in any future pandemic much, much faster, and we show how the world economy could be saved trillions of dollars if we do that by cooperating, by ensuring that vaccines are produced and distributed much more quickly, by ensuring that there's manufacturing capacity is greater spread around the world. But secondly, you've got these new vaccines that are going to be coming on the market soon for malaria, TB, dengue, HIV, AIDS, and the potential there is to save millions of lives if we do this properly. So we've got the thing
Mr.
about
Blair,
COVID is, of course it's been terrible, but there's been enormous advances in medical science too.
Yeah, but from a practical point of view, who would make this happen? Isn't this the role of the World Health Organization?
Yeah, the World Health Organization has got a big role to play, but we suggest the best thing is for this to become a big part of the G20 at the end of this year. Because, you know, whatever differences there are between America and China and different parts of the world, and we can see this now obviously with Russia and Ukraine, on fighting a future pandemic or on ensuring that we use these adult vaccinations to the best, you know, advantage of the world. I mean, this should be something the world can unite around. The other thing is, you've got the capacity today to do genomic sequencing at scale, and that in the end can transform the health infrastructures of countries. So you've got this massive opportunity if we get ourselves organized, and whatever the big issues of the day are, at least one part of the world's mind and endeavor should be directed towards this.
How do you see the private sector playing a role in this effort?
Well, the private sector's got a huge role to play, as indeed it did in the development of vaccines. But I think we need to make sure that there's a greater dispersal of manufacturing capacity. There are many countries in the developing world now looking at partnerships with some of the major Western pharma companies in order to build the capacity in their own country. And we've got to make sure in the future that we mobilize the manufacturing capacity fast to be able to deal with the COVID pandemic and any future pandemic. So, for example, if you think about it, now there are a lot of vaccines flowing to the developing world, but we had a period of around 6 months where countries were short of vaccine. You can't allow that to happen again, because if you do have that, then you'll have the mutations happening in any virus, and then you have a bigger problem even in the Western countries that have vaccinated their population. So these things are pretty obvious, and they're very, very clear. They utilize the best advances in science, and the rest of it is bringing the world together and organizing it.
Yeah. Mr. Blair, last time we caught up actually in Singapore, and we were also talking about China as a possible stabilizing force for the world economy and maybe geopolitics. Given what's happening with Russia and Ukraine, if the West is not hard enough on Putin and he invades Ukraine, would that give the green light for China to invade Taiwan?
Well, I hope China realizes that that would be, again, devastating in its impact on the world, the economy, geopolitics. But I think it is important that the West gives a strong signal on Russia and Ukraine. Yes, because in the end, look, it's a basic difference of value system. I mean, I used to have this conversation with President Putin years and years ago when I would say to him, look, whether these countries want to come with Europe and with NATO, that's up to them. If they decide they want to go with you, fine, I don't mind. And, that's their choice. And we believe in them being free to make that choice. The problem is that he believes, no, it's not their freedom to make that choice. They are part of our broader Russian sphere of influence, and they've got no option but to be part of it, whether they like it or they don't like it. And all of these things would be much more compelling for people if the Russian economy was better, but the Russian economy is what, 70% the size of the UK economy? So the best thing, frankly, would be for these countries to focus on how they improve their own internal economy.